How's it going, Berserkos? A big ol' heap of theory coming at you today regarding everyone's favorite egghead, Skull Knight. Who in the heck is this guy? Really? Is he good? Is he evil? What's this metal skeleton all about? Everything that follows is almost completely speculation, so don't attempt to 1v1 me IRL about it, please. Well, let's go through the parts we know. Skull Knight emits an elfin aura, as stated by Puck. Skull Knight is a self-proclaimed foe of the Inhumans. Skull Knight was referred to as Majesty by Slan, keep that in your head. We know that Skull Knight and Flora have known each other as friends for some time, such as Guts and Shirk are now. SK seems to know the Elf King pretty well, as hinted by SK's knowledge of the Elf King's powers. Okay, so now let's start theorizing. Well, we know he once wore the Berserk's armor, right? What does that imply? He had a reason to don such a thing, yeah? We know famed King Geyserik lost his empire due to an unknown cause. General consensus points to SK being Geyserik, no? Perhaps after this event, SK donned the armor similar to how Guts did in a time of need, or simply just to gain more power on his path of revenge. Then ends up dead due to overuse. I'm particularly intrigued by what led him to dying in this armor. Guts hasn't been in a situation that heavy yet, but then again, he does have Shirke. And potentially SK didn't have Flora in this time, although I'd think she'd be his connection to the Berserk's armor in the first place. He was the tank, and she was his connection to magic, as Shirk is to Guts in present time. So being in a predicament harsher than anything Guts has been through is fairly likely in my opinion. I don't know, makes sense to me. Moving on from here. What about SK's current armor? We're led to believe he died in the Berserk's armor, so is that armor he has on now keeping him from dying? Well, how does that work if he's already dead? Well, maybe Shirke was mistaken and he didn't fully die in the first place. Personally, I think it's a Full Metal Alchemist type deal, where Flora or another magic user, perhaps the Elf King and Flora in tandem, helped bind his soul to this magical elfin armor in order to keep him struggling on. Thus, this is probably the reason Puck feels the elf in Skull Knight. So the whole Geyserik thing. It's up in the air whether it actually is SK or not, but personally, I think it's too apparent to ignore. I mean, the skulls. As we can see in certain panels in Berserk, and in some dialogue given from Skull Knight, we can see he has a particular beef with Void. Perhaps Void is the reason his empire fell. There was a wise man told in the story of Geyserik, and that very well may be Void. I think it's almost undoubtable, actually. Geyserik imprisoned this wise man, and then it was told that 4 angels descended and the empire fell as a cause. Did the wise man sacrifice the empire? I'd say so. That would definitely give reason behind SK's plight to defeat evil. This is the absolute largest parallel within Berserk, and I feel that it would be too odd to stray from it. Wise Man and Geyserik versus Griffith and Guts. It just fits too well to not be somewhat true. There could be some ins and outs that are different, obviously, but come on. Slan calling him Majesty even further supports the idea that he was, at one point, King Emperor Geyserik. Speaking more on the story of the angels coming to the wise man, this would indeed imply that, even if the story was mistakenly translated, Void was indeed not the first God Hand member. There were others before him. There were indeed most likely members of the God Hand that are long gone now. I wonder what could have happened to him. We learned that Zod knew of SK at a time where SK wore the Berserk's armor. Zod states early on in the manga that he'd been journeying for hundreds of years, implying that he wasn't around when SK was starting his business, given SK was around 1,000 years ago, or more. But these two things led me to believe that Zod was being very conservative in his estimation of time. If he knew SK when he donned the Berserk's armor like we're led to believe, and SK was of mortal body at that time, wouldn't that mean that Zod is far older than 300 something years old? Something more like 800 or 900? Just something to keep in mind for future events. Perhaps SK played a role in Zod becoming an apostle in the first place. There are some theories I tend not to believe that are thrown up every now and again, that SK is a former God Hand member, or a formal apostle or something to that effect. There's really one big reason that'll always enter my brain when I hear that. Skull Knight can oppose the God Hand directly. If he were sort of an apostle or something, he'd not be able to withstand opposing their presence for long, as seen with Ganishka and Femto. As for SK being a former God Hand, it'd just go against his character. God Hand are evil, and he's clearly not evil. And when I say clearly, I mean cookie cutter, no doubt about it clearly. He hasn't done anything but good this entire time. He goes out of his way to rescue people even. Could he have prevented certain things or shown up sooner? No to the first, and maybe to the second. But either way, it wouldn't have made a difference. Let's take the example of Griffith in the Eclipse. Could SK have shown up and killed Griffith before he became Femto? You might be thinking, well, yeah, right? The answer is just simply no. Why? Because causality has its plan, and no matter what, that plan will proceed. If you don't understand causality, let me know and I can discuss that further in time. But the simplest answer is that he cannot control certain things. When he did try to intervene in the instance of Ganishka, the plan backfired on him. Even more so, he became the catalyst to progress causality. It can be hard to wrap your head around, but causality is unchangeable, at least as far as we know it now. So when you think, well, why didn't SK just do this sooner? It's because it wouldn't have a different outcome either way. That's just how it is. And speaking more to that, who says SK knew about the events sooner than he acted on them? In the event of Ganishka and the world change, who said he didn't just find out about what was going to happen, or when it was going to happen more specifically? People seem to think that he's somewhat all-knowing, but it wouldn't make sense for him to have some innate ability to see the future. What I think is that he has someone close to him, such as someone like Sonya, who can predict the future to a degree. That person won't always be readily available too, so it's not like SK can get info anytime he wants and be in several places at once. He most likely has to travel and take time to get to this person to receive new information, which could be the reason why he disappears a lot. Again, I don't know, but it makes sense to me. Frittata. But Zagodhan, if that is your real name, it's been 1,000-something years. What if he was evil 1,000 years ago and then decided not to be evil once he became a Godhand member? Well, boys and girls, again, that's just not how it works within the confines of the story we're presented with. The Godhand are evil. They're fully evil. They fuel evil. They aren't their former human selves. So in the case of newly made evil, it just doesn't go back. If Void was once a good man, he is no longer that man. And that goes for the rest of them as well. Want me to talk about his sword? Well, he glues Beharits to it, and it cuts space. There's not much more to it that we know of. Perhaps his magical armor gives him this ability, but we just don't know. Other than that, we can assume SK eats Beharits to rid them from the world, reducing the chances that new evil is born. Whether or not it works is unknown, given the idea of causality and all. Anyway guys, my theories are as good as anyone else's. I wish I had more to say on it, but I just don't. All the theories that have been floating around, the only one that makes sense to me is that he was Geyserik. There's obviously way more that can be touched on regarding Skull Knight, but those are definitely the big points. He's probably Geyserik, he's almost certainly not evil or even anything close, and well, he's just another struggler with a passion to right someone else's wrongs. I'd say he's the goodest guy in all of Berserk, honestly. He may be creepy, especially since skeletons in almost all other media are immediately regarded as creepy and evil, but he's honestly just a lovable egghead who deserves the most trust out of anyone in the series. Prove me wrong, Mira. Be sure to clang me your theories, Berzoingos. Have a great whatever. Bye-bye.